Okay, this is the lead-in to episode 14. Larry? Larry?
Good morning.
Hey, that was
Yes,
pretty... You joined before I could call you and tell you that I sent the email.
I was this time. I was actually set up. I'm wait while I get you pinned.
Yeah, and you have a
All right,
different...
yeah,
You have a different angle today. You're appearing...
yeah.
Yeah, you're appearing vertically. So that's interesting.
Well, yeah. I thought I bear with me.
Mm-hmm. Ah, there we go.
There you go. I had to take the rotation lock off
Got it. Where are you?
on my iPad. Yeah, I'm trying sitting in a new place in the house, and in a slightly different position that might be a little more comfortable.
Okay.
So there is the tapestry that we
Yep.
got a quick view of once before.
Okay. And then when I go to the game, you see...
Yep, I see. You're in the left-hand corner. The game
Okay.
fills the screen, and I'm
Okay.
down in the right corner.
And we've got the other shot. Yep. Okay.
And now I've got you. Now, my goodness, you've got the camera set up so I can see you from different angles.
Yes, this is the side angle. All right. So,
It's a good angle, by the way, for you.
thank you. Yeah, I like that angle actually better than the straight on. Okay, so you sent me that article. We should talk about that a little bit. The New York Times article. And wanted to talk about a conversation I had with a friend. Well, a young man who wanted advice from me because he was taking a new job that would involve travel overseas, and that was interesting. Trying to give advice, and then just check in. So that's my agenda for today. How about
Alrighty.
you?
My agenda is to just follow. Although I'm technically commander, is to do whatever the first mate decrees is what we're doing today.
All right, and I
The
don't know
thing,
what.
the thing I sent you from Zeb, it didn't seem particularly on topic about what we do. I just thought it was an interesting take that I just never thought about it, quite those terms.
Well,
Um,
what was so interesting to me about it was that it introduced all this language to try to describe the problem of living in a society that, essentially consumes its citizens' data.
Like you mean like monetizing of personal information?
Yes, but it was he gave it a title that was actually quite insidious, right? Like,
Like a coup?
yeah,
Yeah.
and so I thought that was very interesting that he gave it that title.
Yeah, we've been taken over and don't know it.
Right, that we're oblivious to the repercussions. And so what usually happens when you lose your freedoms but don't know it is that eventually you figure it out.
Right.
I mean, as a society, obviously, or as an individual. Actually, now that I think about it, works both ways. But when you do, though, the question is, what then? Are you even capable of imagining a world where you didn't lose all of your rights? And he raised some other interesting questions. He implied that the society that they were creating and didn't know it was inherently dysfunctional. That it simply couldn't work. Because it wasn't like, oh, our lives will have less quality. It was that it creates its own collapse. And I didn't quite, he didn't say that literally. He implied it, right? But I do think there's a lot of people who think, oh, no, that's a better world. And I saw another article this week that showed, either Elon Musk or the guy who's in charge of Amazon. And it said multi-billionaires are designing the future, and you shouldn't let them, right?
Ah,
They're designing what the world will be like, and you shouldn't let them. And specifically, they had somebody in front of a rocket. All these guys who are spending their money on space exploration. So I thought that was an interesting twist, because I was thinking about, well, what are we actually doing here? I mean, obviously, if Proxima Flux was insanely successful, it would put Google and Facebook out of business, because a container of data about you sitting on Google's servers or Facebook servers is inherently less valuable than a container of data about you on Proxima Flux's servers, because you give your data context. You're actually engaging in positive feedback loops with your data, whereas in their worlds, they're just stealing your data without extra context, without interaction with you.
Right.
And so, theoretically, your contextualized data would be inherently of greater value, no matter what the value was. Theoretically.
Uh-huh.
Which is why the product is called Core Vox, because the closer you are to the person's truth, the better the insights that you can derive. But in exchange, they have to actually own their data, right? They have to actually be able to own some benefit on what they produce. But even if Proxima Flux and Core Vox, sort of just become footnotes in the historical march, it's the idea that's worth spreading, right? Because the idea that you should own, and that diversity is important, and that it's okay to have a database that knows everything, but what's not okay is that database not be transparent about how it operates.
Right.
With your data. And I think those are the kinds of concepts that we're ultimately trying to get out there. I mean, that's what this week's reading made me think of.
Huh.
So, because if we get that out there, then when people realize what the article that Zeb gave us, is true to the degree that to the extreme degree that it is, then people will start to cast about for solutions. And the first solution they'll come up with is, to try to legislate something, or to, but here we are. We're saying no, you can't put the monkey back in, right? You can't.
I was going to say, yeah, that's the classic locking the barn door after the horse is out.
Exactly. You can't do that. You're just going to create a billion loopholes, and it's just never going to be. It's not going to work. So you kind of have to come up with a vision of the future that embraces it. That says, okay, you will have less privacy in the sense that something is going to be collecting your feedback, but you will have greater privacy because that something gives you ownership and feedback loops with your data, right? So that you refine who you are. And you also don't get this feeling like, you're being watched, or that, somebody's monetizing you. You are monetizing you, right? That's the idea anyway, is that you're saying, no, this is what I want to be known for, or this is what I want. If I'm going to be monetized, this is what I want to be monetized for, right? And I think that's interesting. And then there's a few exceptions, like you say, oh, I'll help out medical science, blah, 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 with my data, as long as it's not a drug company who's going to make a drug that they profit off of and I don't get my share, right? I mean, imagine a new drug came out and everybody whose data went into figuring out that drug had to get a share of the profits.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what blockchain and Bitcoin are for, right? Ultimately, that's why they exist.
Well, I never thought of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of unthinkable right now because it's like impossible to do. But it's going to be very possible in the future.
Seems to me that it's a completely abstract idea, but it'll be very hard to have a world in which there's only one place where your data is it is stored and collected and is what it is. Like say Corvax, there's always going to be other entities who want it for their own purposes.
Right.
And I don't know how you could prevent them from getting it.
You don't. You can't. But what happens is if you create the mindset that I should own my data, then when other people, for instance, if I want to buy something from some companies, I just have to give them a certain amount of my data just to get the service that they're selling, right? And I can't demand that data, be deleted instantaneously after they're done because they want to serve me again or they, whatever. So I can't imagine that all my data would be located in one place. But what I do imagine is that when it comes to looking at a new problem or looking at a very broad set of data, no database would be bigger than the database where...
Well, that's okay. All right.
I just have to be number one. I don't have to be the monolith, right? So another way to think about it is I used to interview global CIOs from big companies, Fortune 500 companies. And data was always an issue because they didn't know how to... They were afraid of Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, right? Because they were afraid these companies had so much data about people that it would let them divine insights about people that would allow them to open up lines of business that competed with the Fortune 500 company, right?
Right.
So the Fortune 500 company would keep lots and lots of data, thinking that it was very, very valuable, but not knowing what to do with it, not having enough, not being a drop in a bucket compared to the big players. But and that data is risk, because when they have a breach and somebody gets that data, then there's a loss, which means the board has a line item in the budget, like insurance and or potential risk, if that data gets leaked.
Right.
And that's money. That costs money. That line of risk is money. So I said to the CIO, well, what would it be beneficial if you could have a system that would give that data in a very controlled way, so they wouldn't be able to review everything you collected, but rather just know they now own it, but give it back to the actual end users. And then you could rent it back anytime you actually wanted to do insights work for your company. And based on the way that the contract is signed, if you were the first company in your industry to the table, you could help set the terms for how other companies in your industry would either, get the pooled benefits against a common threat, or, would definitely not get the advantage of all the data you collected and only the data they collected in this common pool. But in exchange, the individual is taking on the risk of breach. So you still have access to the data, but you are no longer responsible for keeping it secure. The individual is taking on that responsibility. And they said, I'd sign that contract in a heartbeat. That would save me $50 million off my bottom line.
Yeah.
So if you did that with just Fortune 500 companies, you could pass Google and Facebook and the others pretty quickly. And we already know behaviorally, those companies don't know how to derive insights. So the most interesting part is they would actually learn how to from the consumers. The consumers would actually go, hey, we want our data to be more valuable. Let's dialogue about 3M, right?
Yeah.
And sure enough, they'd start to come up with stuff, and 3M could publicly respond to it. And before 3M knew it, they'd be in a dialogue with their data source, right? And that's pretty darn cool. But the trick is that you as a user, you wouldn't actually be able to see, hey, show me my 3M data. You can't do that. You would just be informed that you received 5, megabytes of data from 3M if you agree to the contract so that they can still access it, for insights purposes, but that, they're renting it back and they're paying you this many pennies every time you're a part of a query. And you go, okay. And then those pennies add up.
I pretty much understand what you're saying. My initial sort of, I guess fear would not be the right word, but the stumbling block I see is it takes quite an intelligent mind to be able to understand what you just said and agree to participate in it.
Yes. And that's
all most people care about is if they have their Ralph's reward card, it costs $3 less than if they don't.
right. No, you're right.
They
Absolutely.
they don't care that the reason that they're scanning the card is the reason they're offering you $3 off is because you have just sold them information about yourself for $3
Right.
that they may use themselves or sell to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're talking about really is it's a big concept to try and it makes me think about, maybe you and I have even mentioned this before, about how people are always bitching about how on an airline these days you have to pay for everything individually, but if you're an airline that tries to be upfront about the things somebody's going to actually end up really needing and
Mm-hmm.
put it all in the price of the ticket and it costs more, nobody buys it.
Right.
So it involves the ability to look beyond the immediate future, which
right.
is not a I don't know whether it's evolutionary or whether it's something that's come out of our society, or whether, I think part of it is, or a large part of it is, that the speed at which the future changes has increased so exponentially that it's outstripped evolution.
Right. Well, I agree with you. I agree with all of that. Actually, I think it's absolutely not just true, but it's unchallengeable. However, I had to think really hard about the part where the person is talking, getting value out of the system. I don't think they care about the pennies that they would get. I don't think they care anything about any of the business model that I just described. I think they care about feeling better about themselves. And that's why the interface starts with this idea of, well, who am I? Can you tell me about myself that I would find interesting, right? And at the very, very beginning, it's as simple as, if the two of you, if the two of us are on this call and we're talking to each other, what's the third visible concept that convinces us to feel better about ourselves as we have our conversation? Right? What is the visual that gets transformed or that happens? Or it's far, far simpler than the business model underneath. I don't think anybody's going to take the time, I agree with you, to understand the business model underneath. But then what happens is you enjoy this third entity that's in our call, and one day it makes you money. That's kind of like an American dream thing.
People certainly do enjoy attention.
Yeah.
And do enjoy being, they get satisfaction from being listened to.
Mm-hmm.
That part, that is true.
Yeah, being heard or whatever, right?
Being heard, somebody feeling that what they think is important enough to pay,
Mm-hmm.
to listen to and respond to and take seriously. That is true. That I can see.
And that's what I think we're really working on as like the prerequisite, that the whole idea doesn't work unless we can deliver on that. And And that's why last time we were talking about how hard it is to be both a great listener and an omnipresent presence, but also be allowed to be wrong, to be constantly going, oh, did I get that? Oh, I'm so sorry. I always get things wrong, right? Like, to be both is really, really hard. But if you can be both, that could convince somebody that they are participating in something, that they are making something happen.
What are you doing?
Oh, I stopped at a place where somebody apparently is a bad guy is, and I launched my fighter, our fighter commander, and now I'm looking at who this is, and I noticed there's a policeman in the area, and I think we're going to just collect the bounty on this guy. Alila, but she doesn't have a very strong ship, so she's not going to make it very far.
Now, is she part of the game or a player?
She's a part of the game. Yeah, she's mad now. She's saying she's trying to scan us, and I'm making it hard because I keep rotating the ship. Now she's demanding 2 tons of our monzonite, or she'll open fire. And now she's thinking about it. She's giving us time to comply. And she's opened fire. She's shooting at us now. And now our fighter, our little helper fighter, he's shooting at her. He's shooting at her right now, and he's already brought down her shields. And she's firing back at him now. So the two of them are in a dogfight now. And now the cop has gotten involved. She's saying this can all stop if you just give me those 2 tons of manzanite.
Yeah.
And she's down to 3%, and she's going to blow up before we can even get to her insights.
That's all of them.
So then we're going to pick up the goodies. Going to go to the goodies that she dropped. And, oh, they fly right by. So we got to turn around again. And we're going to go to a limpet collector and collect the goodies. There we go.
So you stole from a pirate?
I blew up a pirate, and then the pirate had just pieces of their ship that didn't get destroyed by the explosion.
Oh, so this is just a salvage operation.
Yes. So we go to our collector. We only need 1 collector for this because it's only 4 pieces of goods. And you can see our collector goes out, and then it comes back, and it goes to the bottom of the ship, and it puts the shield emitters in, and now it's going out to the other piece. And while they do that, we're going to tell our fighter pilot to orders, come back to the ship.
Ready to bring
So
the
the
fighter
fighter
back to the
pilot's
ship,
now
Commander.
going to start moving into position, and then we're going to watch the fighter pilot dock. And now the fighter pilot is going to dock. And he's now back inside the ship. And then the limpet is finishing collecting stuff. There's only 1 more piece left. Almost done. It's coming back. There it is. And we're done. So
Yay. So we got some of her stuff.
Yep, we got the stuff, and so then we go back to Lightspeed and see if there's any other places to stop and see what happens.
This is hard to articulate, but because I can't really explain even why I think it. But my feeling is that what you are describing can only emerge. This wasn't in my head until this very second as the image, but like a phoenix from the ashes. That basically, first there's going to have to be the Dark Ages before there's the Renaissance.
I think I understand what you're saying, but do
That
go on.
that
I want to connect
that
with this.
that the way things are now is, it has so much inertia in its favor
Yes.
that until things get much worse, um, there won't be there 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 won't be a blank slate on which to start things, to basically start things from a different initial point.
Yeah. Also completely agree. But what that gives us is between now and that crash, all the time we'd ever want to play around and figure
That's
out
true.
what it is that we're talking about. And because we're doing it on a public uh, discussion, um, it means that it doesn't get lost because AI is just going to keep getting smarter and smarter and smarter, right? Well, this guy's wanted, and he just rammed us, so I think that counts as. How come we can't fire? Oh, there we go. He's gone. Wait, not yet. There we go. I think that what you and I are doing right now amounts to having fun and asking the
Right.
question, well, what is it? We don't have to make this like some kind of crazy successful business. We don't have to take over, the things that I just said. We just have to have a system that we know could do better, and we know what its core principles are. And the real question we're asking is, how does it start from nothing? How does it start from where you and I are right now, which is just playing
Right.
a video game and having a conversation, right? What we'd like is to be able to create an AI that we just invite it to the conversation or we don't invite it to the conversation. And we get value without having to believe in all the other things that it could be someday.
Okay. This is my lunch time, so
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm, I'm still here.
Let me check. Yep, it's still there. So, um, yeah. So that was my thought. That's why I said slow might be the new fast,
Uh,
because that's what people are used to, is looking out for themselves, their businesses, by anything that's moving at them fast. But they don't really get that concerned when you're just sort of a happy-go-lucky little thing, and you just happen to be developing a model that could replace the whole thing.
um, okay, I buy that. Um, bear with me here.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons that I keep mentioning The Peripheral to you, the William Gibson novel, is because it seems to me that in the portion of the book which is about the far distant future, that he does an amazing job of imagining something that could emerge from annihilation of society as we knew it,
Mm-hmm.
and I can't even try. I won't try to even like synopsize what it is. I but that it only could have happened post annihilation.
Right. Right. That only the clean sheet. Well, and part of what I studied uh, for all those years was the history of mediums. And one of the interesting things about mediums is that what you can do at the birth of a medium can never be done again, because once the medium is settled, it's too late. You can't you know you can't say, oh, television, it's done, right? We're gonna do it differently now, right? You'd be destroying too many companies to do that, right?
Right.
There's just too much momentum. The same thing with banking, right? There's a movement afoot right now to undo the way banking works, and it, it and then it's called blockchain, right? Blockchain is trying to undo the way banking works, and it just seems very unlikely to succeed,
Fire is now active. Standing by.
right? Because they're trying to do exactly what this idea that I'm talking about is, which is to create something simple that just grows at its own pace, and then when it's big enough, it can start actually eating into the transactions and dollars of an entire industry,
Mm-hmm.
right? And force it to change. Um, and that's what blockchain is trying to do. At least that's what the people who are passionate about blockchain are trying to do. I don't know that. Okay, good. I don't know that that's actually going to happen, or that all the people who believe in blockchain believe that. I just know that the super passionate people believe that. Cryptocurrency, that's why they care, is because they really want that to happen. Um, but I'm not sure they know why they want it to happen, or why they feel such antagonism towards centralized banks, right? Um, I'm not positive they understand their reasons why they feel the way they do. I just think that they're like, well, I don't like the decisions of a large society being made by a few. Does that make sense?
You know what? Cryptocurrency is something I do not understand.
Well, it's a fascinating conversation without understanding the technology.
It isn't the technology; it's the why it has value. Simply because someone decreed that it has value. That I was I was I was somewhat relieved to hear that Milton Friedman said the same thing, which isn't saying that obviously it does have value because people have become billionaires with it. But when Kodak decided they would go into the cryptocurrency business, what if Larry Streichman just decides to go into the cryptocurrency business? Why is cryptocurrency that I put out there worth any?
Because there's a limited amount of it, because it has a digital signature that cannot be replicated and it cannot be stolen. And so if Larry Streichman starts conducting all of his business in L-Bucks, and eventually he becomes a pretty big purveyor of business in L-Bucks, L-Bucks become worth something.
But why would anybody want one of my L-Bucks?
Because your particular business conducts its business in L-Bucks. And if you want to buy Larry Streichman's services, you're going to have to buy L-Bucks, and then you're going to have to get his service with L-Bucks.
Are there crypto? I thought like Bitcoin. I didn't think things like like specifically Bitcoin did anything other than make Bitcoin.
Yes, but Bitcoin is something that you'd consider like a long-term value holder. You don't actually go down to the grocery store and buy milk with the Bitcoin. I mean, you can, but that's not why they created Bitcoin. the reason why they created Bitcoin is because there was never going to be more than a certain number of them in existence. I think 21 million or something like that. That there
Well, I
are
didn't know.
what?
I didn't know that part.
Yeah. So the whole point of Bitcoin is that that there are 21 million of them, and once they're mined, and somebody owns them. And then all further mining really just validates the ledger keeping, the bookkeeping, the ledgers, the digital ledgers. And so if you want to do a transaction on Bitcoin, let's say that you had 5 Bitcoins and I had 2 Bitcoins and you wanted to give me 1 Bitcoin, okay, in exchange for services. Well, there are 57 ledgers currently active that track Bitcoin transactions. I have a ledger, you have a ledger. Our ledgers don't trust each other, so we need to do really complicated math to basically validate every transaction on the ledger to make sure our ledgers match before your Bitcoin can be transferred to me and then registered with all the other ledgers. And that's a lot of computational time. It takes a lot of time for a computer to do all that work. And so you and I are willing to give up 1/1,000,000th of our Bitcoin transaction to the people who are just using their PCs to quote unquote mine Bitcoins. And really what they're doing is providing the transactional power that we need to maintain our very complicated ledger system so that it's egalitarian. So that's what's going on.
And what's to prevent somebody from, you said, there'll be X amount of Bitcoin out there. What's to prevent somebody from just deciding to change their mind and make more?
Remember I said those ledgers track all the Bitcoins? Every Bitcoin that was ever created had to appear on a ledger. And in order to appear on the ledger, it had to prove that it did the math computation necessary to generate it in the first place. In other words, it has a mathematically precise sequence. So if you said, "Oh, I just want to manufacture a Bitcoin, let me go do that," the first ledger that you tried to register your Bitcoin with would say, "Okay, tell me which coin you are in the sequence and why you supposedly own it." And you would be unable to comply because you can't do all that math, and that math has already been done by somebody else. Somebody else owns that coin. So you'd basically be in contention for that coin, and they were on the ledger a long time before you and have the cryptographic code to unlock that coin, and you don't. You don't have that key code. So in order to crack it, you would need to break a 180, very complicated encryption key that you could only really crack if you had if you had quantum computing. But we don't have wide use of quantum computing yet, so that coin is safe. You just really can't crack it, and you can't fake them. They're unfakeable.
And so are all the Bitcoins that there ever will be already out there someplace?
Yes. And they were before they were mined too.
And who made them, Mr. Bitcoin?
Yeah, this is the interesting part. It was a couple of developers who figured all this out, and then they gave it away free to the world.
It's fascinating.
Well, it doesn't really work if they try to be, the bank of Bitcoin, right? Then they're no different than everybody else, except there's nothing backing the value of what they built.
But they kept some of the Bitcoin for themselves.
No, I don't think they did, actually.
Really?
They created the math algorithms because they want, as an experiment, to just learn about how value transacts, and they looked at the history of economics and what tended to go wrong in in terms of economic systems. And one of the things that goes wrong is that central governments print more money, right? They value and devalue the money. So they said, well, we're computer scientists. We should be able to figure this out. Let's create something where you can't create more money.
This sounds like this sounds like a return to the gold standard.
In some ways, actually, that's a very good parallel, because even though there's no actual gold behind a Bitcoin, it behaves exactly like gold used to, because there's a finite quantity.
That was always the up until the United States made it illegal to have gold coins.
Right.
Because I'm interested in ancient history and all this ancient stuff. Ancient coins were of value only because of what they were made of.
Right.
And there was a punishable by death crime. People would snip teeny little pieces off the edges of coins. It was called clipping. Often ancient coins will have just a little triangle out of the side, because if you did that, and collected them, after a while you could melt them down and then make some more coins.
Right.
Different coins had different. The coins that Mark Antony minted to pay his armies for the final conflict between him and Cleopatra and Augustus and whoever was left on the one who won, were of such high quality silver that they were still in circulation for 300 or 400 years.
Yeah.
Because they were known as that the coin in the Bible, that Jesus tossing the money changers out of the temple.
Right.
Well, that was because when you paid your temple tax, you were only allowed to pay it in one particular coin, which was the shekel of Tyre. Tyre was the old name for Phoenicia.
Okay.
Which is kind of now Syria, Lebanon. And they were known to be of extremely high quality silver, and so you had to turn whatever you brought into shekels of Tyre in order to pay your taxes. I don't know how I got off on this, but you reminded me. It was of the. And then when little by little we ended up in a world which is really, the term I've heard is fiat money. It's money because you decree it to be money.
Right.
Of which there can be an infinite amount, because it actually has no intrinsic value. Mm-hmm. Not that gold, by the way, has any intrinsic value in most cases. I mean, it has a few industrial,
purposes. Yeah. Right.
But mostly its value is in its scarcity.
Right.
This really sounds like a the next future version of a return to something like that.
Well, if you think about it, it has to happen, because in a future where we can manufacture any element that we want to, I think you made that point last week, where it's like any civilization significantly advanced enough to travel the stars, you'd think they'd have the ability to. Yeah,
that always bothering.
Right.
They've traveled, like a gazillion light years in order to get unobtainium.
Right.
When apparently they've got the technology to get there, but they can't make a molecule.
Right. And that's exactly the point, is that the guys who invented Bitcoin were thinking about that problem, and they were saying to themselves, well, this is ridiculous. We can't keep basing our coinage in the future on things that are rare. What we need to do is just have the coins themselves be rare. And so they created Bitcoin.
So,
And then they said, and then other people specialize in creating cool. Yeah. Sorry, I just like that. Like the explosion.
ooh,
So there are people who create special mechanisms so that you can, let's say you had a lot of gold and you wanted to make that gold more mobile to get you more value for that gold. You could convert that gold into a type of coin where the gold's not going to go anywhere. It's just a coin backed by your gold, right?
right.
And that gold can become its own economy as long as the gold doesn't go anywhere. And if the economy ever collapses, the people can go and to your gold and take the gold that equals the number of coins that you know what I mean? Just like
Right.
And people have done that with their houses or their businesses now. They're like, oh, I own a house. I'll just turn it into a cryptocurrency. And instead of taking out an extended loan and paying interest on that, I will have my friends own cryptocurrency based on the value of my property. And then I will spend the money that my business partners give me, but then when I'm gone, they get the house, right? Or whatever, the business or whatever valuable thing I've decided to turn into a cryptocurrency. It also is very hard for governments to regulate because
Yeah.
if you want to send $1 million to China, right, or more to the point, $1 million out of China, that's actually really, really hard.
Yeah.
But if you want to send $1 million in Bitcoin, it's unstoppable. It cannot be
Yeah.
stopped.
Yeah. Okay.
But it has huge problems. The biggest of which is it's starting to piss people off, right? Because of those very same things that. So it's and also one of the big problems is when you get a couple of coins, if you lose the keys to those coins.
I was
No.
going to say, as long as you remember your password.
Yeah, if you lose the keys to those coins for whatever reason, they can never be retrieved. Those coins are gone forever. Nobody can ever claim those coins. They're gone. As a matter
Wow.
of fact, out of the 21 million bitcoins that have already been created, they estimate, because it's impossible to know for sure, that about 2 million of them have already become permanently lost.
Wow.
Yeah, they simply cannot be recovered.
Well,
And,
that's security for you.
yep, that's how it works. And so, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting conversation. But the point is that in the future, if money isn't worth what money once was worth, if it's based on these new principles, then what we really also want to think about is what about labor? What is labor worth, right? Especially when we can manufacture molecules, as we are
Right.
talking about. I think that's just fascinating. I mean, yeah, I have my own ideas, like, unique perspectives and diverse dialogue equaling the real work of a society, blah, 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 right? Those are my ideas. But a lot of other people have other ideas about what a future where labor is different, just fundamentally different, would look like. And I like talking about it because, to me, it's just very interesting to try to work through the problem of, well, what would it mean? And I like doing it on a public forum like this because then I feel like no matter who or what ever watches the words I say, it will get picked up by the algorithms that are interested in this topic in the future.
Yeah, that's right. That's true.
It doesn't matter. It's in the public record, as they say. So, and I feel really good about that. I'm like, oh. So my attitude towards this show is kind of like the product is already working because someday the product will be working.
Uh-huh.
Therefore,
No,
yeah, these words count, right? I love that. I think that's cool. But it also forces me to think about, well, what do my words mean? And how often can I actually be trusted to actually say words of meaning versus just say things like, oh, I saw a cool car the other day, or
right.
I really like waffles, right? You know,
Mm-hmm.
which by my estimate, having rewatched a lot of these episodes are very dense in meaning. There's a lot there. It doesn't seem like it at first, but when you sit there and you force yourself to rewatch
You
it,
mean our episodes?
what our episodes, yes, our episodes to date are packed with a lot,
That's true.
and it's a high density of information and concepts, and so I like that too, especially since they wander, but they wander in and out and around a central theme. And I think that's the best. I want to capture that for dialogue, that I don't always have to be talking about precisely the topic to be talking about precisely the topic. I think there's something to that. I don't know exactly how to phrase it, but that's.
Well, I'll tell you how Shakespeare said it.
How did he say it?
We've mentioned it before when he hires those players to put on that provocative play about the
Oh yeah,
poisoning.
yeah.
And it is by indirection, find direction out.
Yes. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, right?
No, they're Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are observers.
Oh, that's right. They're not the players. That's right.
They have a spectacular play of their own written by Tom Stoppard. I don't know if you've ever seen.
Yes. I've.
Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead.
Yeah.
I saw I think it was the English production that came over to Broadway. It was just brilliant.
I unfortunately saw the movie, so I can't compare that. Yeah.
It's one of those plays. Stoppard's plays don't translate terribly well to movies.
Yeah.
But in this case, it was much simpler. It was look, see what kind of reaction he gets from his uncle, who is now the king who married his mother,
Right.
watching play about a king arranging for the murder of a king, and when he stands up in a tirade and stalks out, it for him proves his point.
Right. He knows his father did exactly that. His uncle did exactly that. Well, and what's interesting is I track that in my own behavior. Like, for instance, we watch movies that are we watch stuff that's not always very good. Kathy and I.
Right.
For some reason, our TV time is important to us, and it's part of who we are as a couple. And so, in order to fill the plate, we'll watch things that are not that very good, and we'll just watch them and comment on why we think that went that way, or why they weren't very good, or I don't know. And the one thing that I find is that when I watch things that have a really, really bad plot point, and it's taking a really long time for them to get to the inevitable thing that they set up 1 billion years ago and now they're belaboring.
Right.
I can't stay in my seat.
Mm-hmm.
I have to get up. I have to get up, especially if it has to do with certain topics, like a person making an obviously bad decision that they know is a bad decision and they don't know why they're making the bad decision. But it involves betrayal or cheating or, you know, just things that bother me, right? And I'll just get uncomfortable, and I won't even notice that I'm suddenly in the kitchen. Not I can still hear the TV, but I don't want to be there watching it. Does that make sense? And then
Yeah.
I'll catch myself because it annoys Kathy to no end. Because then she pauses the TV, and I find myself annoyed. I'm like, don't pause it. I came over here to get through that scene.
Get away from this part of it.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's, and so then I'll be like, okay, I gotta change a little bit. I'm doing this too often. I need to get tougher.
Well, it sounds like if you get actually engaged with something, and it can be agitating. I mean, this isn't a big enough example to be, I don't know, worth going to the kitchen for, but every time in a horror movie, when somebody's in a isolated house in the middle of nowhere where horror is afoot and the lights go out and there's a strange noise in the basement and their decision is to go down in the basement and see what it is, I always think, have you never seen a horror movie?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, everything else about this movie suggests you live on planet Earth, and in this time frame, and have seen movies. You know what happens when people do that. Why are you doing the thing that and the answer is obvious, is because that's what advances the plot the way the writer wants to advance the plot, by having somebody do something totally nonsensical.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, that's the kind of thing. Yeah, that's exactly it. It just drives me crazy.
I get annoyed at stuff like that too. That's about that. So, like politely pausing so you won't miss anything when you're trying desperately to miss it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I really don't want to see this part because they don't. But my thing is when somebody's like, when they've written a line or two of dialogue or given an action that is going to cause the character to change, to do what you might call a temporary change in disposition. So, what the character A loves character B, but something happens, and for at least 15 minutes to 20 minutes, character A is suddenly going to think character B is betrayed them, and so they're going to behave in a way that is very destructive, right? And that would be okay if I believed that character B had betrayed them, or if I believed the circumstances, or if but when it's something far beneath the character A's intelligence level,
Right.
then I just get so I just get really, which is funny because Shakespeare really liked to use those misunderstandings, those really simple, one sentence said here, misunderstandings.
That's true.
And I actually found them all to be very annoying, except when the villain was particularly good at them.
Uh-oh, we froze.
Oh, did we? Let me check.
Yep, we're unfrozen now.
Okay. So we had a bandwidth hiccup. But then again, I also get up from the seat if I'm watching an I Love Lucy episode, so I don't want to read too much into it, because when Ricky would say, "Absolutely not, Lucy, you can't do whatever," and then she'd be like, "Okay," and then she's like, next scene, she's got this harebrained idea, and you're like, "That's not going to go well,"
I have that reaction to Leave It to Beaver. Have you ever seen Leave It to Beaver?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
He never learned.
Yeah.
His friends were always talking him into doing something that would get him in trouble. Like, it was school picture day, and they tell him that they weren't going to wear a coat and tie, even though they were told. And then, of course, they all would except for him.
Right.
or they send him up to the top of some billboard to look inside of a coffee cup to see if the steam coming out was real. But and he just and every single and the other thing that bothered me about that show was what the hell was Wally doing with a friend like Eddie Haskell?
Yeah. Who allowed that? Yeah, exactly.
I mean, everything you knew, everything else about Wally suggested he would never have a friend like Eddie Haskell.
Right.
But I mean, I know it served the plot, and then of course there's the charm of his name, Beaver Cleaver.
Yes, I know.
Um, but
Yeah. What do you
yeah,
want to do with the beaver?
you know, there was a this is different, but you'll get the connection. Um, I think it was Procter and Gamble was in town. This was at home when I was in Hallmark, and it was when we were doing the remake of Call of the Wild. It was being done actually, what turned out to be The Rise. And we all went to, Bob took the Procter and Gamble people and me and the writer and whomever to lunch at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, which is a a swank dining room. Mm-hmm. And I was looking at the menu and I went, look at this. They've got there's some fascinating salad with all these different ingredients in it, complemented by a lime vinaigrette, and they had spelled complimented the way you spell it when you're giving someone praise, not when you're saying something goes well.
Right.
They use the I, not the E. And I said, I'm sitting there, I'm saying this, I can't believe in a place like this, that, $27.50 salad that they get. And Bob interrupted me and said, Laddie, this is lunch. You cannot give them someone that.
I love it.
And it did shut me up because that's exactly what I was doing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Kathy does that to me all the time when I'll be like, and this, and then she'll go, it's a TV show. And I go, okay. But then sometimes she'll get mad, and I'll have to do the same for her, so it goes back and forth. Because the other day, she was getting very angry at The Walking Dead, which we finally decided to watch after ignoring it for all of its heyday. Because it used to be in the news and everything all the time. So we finally watched it, and we got through till about season 7, and then it just, it wasn't going anywhere. They'd run out of material. They were having trouble getting the actors to get along, or something. I don't know what was going on, but you could just tell in the production that they'd run out of stuff, and so Kathy was mad. she was angry at them, and I was like, wait a minute, we knew this show eventually would go bad, right? I mean, we read the headlines, we buy Entertainment Weekly, we know that eventually it goes bad. It's just the fact that it made it.
I felt that way a little bit about True Blood. I don't know if you watched that.
Oh yeah, we did. Yeah.
I mean, it eventually reached the point where they had just they had mined every possible corner of the original concept and moved off into stuff which was a different show entirely.
Right.
And not still well done for whatever it was that it was, but it wasn't the show that I'd invested 3 or 4 years of watching episodes in.
Yep.
Moving forward, they just went, well, okay, how about we? It's like when I said, how about if Scarlett's arrested for murder?
Yeah, right, and she's raped and yeah, exactly.
But because ideas do in storytelling is unless it's episodic storytelling in which essentially your lead character moves from place to place and encounters a new situation, which resolves itself in an episode or two and then moves to it. If it's set in one place, eventually it's over.
Right.
You just. I read it. It was an article in the New Yorker, I think, that I read it. I thought it was a great line, and as I thought about it, I think there's a tremendous amount of truth in it. It said, "There are only two stories: someone leaves home, or a stranger comes to town."
Ah,
And as I stopped and thought about it, I thought, you know, and sometimes they're both in the same. It's the same story.
right.
But that kind of is it. Something has to disrupt the status quo.
Right.
Um,
Yes.
TV evolved into this. The, the 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 shows that were on in the '60s, which are too far back for you, were episodic. That were very successful. Were episodic. The lead characters were wanderers.
Right.
Uh,
Kung
and
Fu and the Incredible Hulk and
I'm back way before that.
I know, but I'm just naming some of the more.
I'm back on like Route 66
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
whoever the doctor who was accused of murder and was trying to find the woman the one-armed man who killed his wife, and so many of the westerns um, um,
The Fugitive.
done
That's what that was. Yeah.
you know there were very few that were rooted in one place. Bonanza was one of the few, but it had so many characters in it that and new characters were constantly coming into the story.
Yeah.
Um,
But also Bonanza, they would even though the ranch was the place, the story would always kind of branch out to like all of these far-flung parts of the, because their ranch was so big, it would border like a billion things, right? Like,
right.
and plus they use Stranger Comes to Town quite a bit, so.
When I was in the training program at CBS, and they started me in the movie. You moved around through every department in the place in the course of a year, not just programming, but promotion and business affairs and just everything. But one of the places you went was, and we happened to start me in, was TV movies, and I instantly knew it was where I wanted to stay. And the guy who was in charge of the department, his name was Steve Mills. He grew up in a farm in Nebraska. Liked to used to try and catch me when I was still a tadpole. And we had this was the mid '80s, and there was a whole spate of remakes of black and white Western series that had been big hits, where the leads were still ambulatory enough that you could make a movie.
Right.
And he would always do. He wouldn't look up from his notes. He would just out of nowhere say, "Larry, the lead character in Have Gun Will Travel is called Paladin." Do you know Have Gun Will Travel at all?
Oh, me? No, I do not.
Okay, it was Richard Boone is the actor. You could look him up. He was dressed all in black, and he was a gun for hire. And if he considered that whoever it was that you needed help from was a bad guy, he would usually take the job.
Okay.
But he only took jobs where whoever it was deserved to be taken down.
He had a code.
And it was called Paladin. I think it's the Middle Eastern term for knight.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
I only know that from Dungeons and Dragons, so
And so he was. In fact, the theme song was "A Knight Without Armor and a Savage Lamb," and and he said, "Larry, what was Paladin's first name?" And I remember that in the credits they showed his calling card, and it said in the middle, "Have Gun Will Travel," and then underneath it said in smaller letters, Wire Paladin, San Francisco. And I said, would that be Wire, sir? And he said, that is correct. And I loved looking at the looks on the faces of the people around the table. Because I don't think anybody else had any idea.
Right.
He also, because I was so naive about politics, he would set me up. There was he'd ask me what ask me what I thought about a script. Then in a staff meeting where the person who was in charge of developing it was there, we had a New York office with like one person who developed scripts, and she came out like once every 2 months. Mm-hmm. And this particular script was about it was something. It was after 3 Mile Island, and it was some story about an evil nuclear facility, that needed to be closed, or I don't know, whatever. But it was the sort of script in which someone would say, as you know, and then there'd be a page of statistics about things about nuclear energy, which all just in terms of creativity. If you have to start something with "as you know," there's no reason to say it in the first place.
Right.
And there was just a lot of it in that script. And I said to Steve when he asked me what I thought of it, I said, well, there's partial, whatever I said about most of it, I said, but ultimately what it reminded me of was the kind of film strips on 16 millimeter film, which when I was young was what all they had, which they would occasionally show us in grade school, usually on a day when it was raining and you couldn't go outside for recess. Mm-hmm. And they would have titles like Atomic Energy and You.
Yeah.
And so we're sitting at a staff meeting where Ellie, who developed this, he said, Larry, tell Ellie what you said about whatever the name of the thing was. And I just say, and look at this like frozen smile on her face.
Oh man, she was like, "Argh."
Eventually I caught on to be a little more careful.
Yeah. Exposition.
But it always did when people say things to, it's a little bit like what you said about leaving the room. When people say things to people that they would never in a real conversation ever say.
Right.
Like that. When it's clearly meant, they might as well turn toward the camera and talk to the audience, because that clearly is what's going on.
Right.
But they pretend it's part of a conversation that would never take place.
Right. Right. They would never say that. Right.
I
And there's a ton of it, like TV especially. They especially science fiction TV, which Kathy and I watch a lot of. Science fiction has a really tough time because you're trying to introduce a character who is the period or the world that you've set this story in, right? And that means you have to explain things, but you want to cut down on the exposition as much as you possibly can. You want people to just simply do things in that world, not say, well, I've lived here all my life and this is how you buy a robot, and so it's really hard in sci-fi and that's how you really start to tell the different. I mean, even
that's one of the things I like about we've talked about Otherland. Was that it? The Tad Williams.
Yep. Tad Williams. Yep.
And a lot of Gibson stuff, especially the Peripheral. He makes you figure out the basic game rules of the world and the society.
Yeah, he makes you figure it out.
You have to piece together from what happens, what kind of a world it is and how things go.
Right.
He doesn't. It took me at least half of the first book of Otherland to finally figure out that all of these stories were not just parallel stories, that they were all alternative realities that existed, that related back to this group of um, guys floating in tanks, but whose avatars were Egyptian gods.
Right,
I,
right,
um,
right.
but for half a book, I thought every chapter is about a different story. What the fuck is going on here?
Exactly. Yeah, you'd be like, why are we solving these problems in these totally different environments, right? And
Um,
yeah,
but when you do, it's a great sense of accomplishment and adventure,
right,
and it lets you tell a much more sophisticated story because you don't spend 2/3 of your time explaining. Uh, this is a planet that revolves around a sun, which is a source of heat and energy, which it's you um, uh, and and the peripheral in particular took me because it's got these two stories going. It has two stories going that do intersect, but it took me a while to be able to figure out what the hell was going on.
right.
Um, and and there are some writers who in TV movies you really couldn't do that because people didn't have who watch TV movies just don't have the patience.
No, no, that
If
yeah,
it's if they're going to have to wait till the third act before they understand what it's about, they're gone.
right.
So so the kind of storytelling that I liked the best was not the way you could tell a story. Um, I can't remember why I got started on it. It's something about oh, trying to explain to writers sometimes that they were intentionally being mysterious. That I was all for that as a principle in literature, but in this particular form, I people needed to know what they were committing the next 2 hours to by the end of the first act.
Right.
I mean, you could do twists and turns and surprises, but they needed a basic idea of what it was they were watching.
They had to sign a social contract, as it were. We are on
Yeah.
an adventure. We are on a romantic thing. They need something to connect to that locks them in, so that then they're willing to
The
go for the ride.
the one and only time that I actually I'm glad I didn't do it because ultimately I think it reflects more poorly on you than somebody else, the other person. But um, we did a mini series, which I seem to get a lot of these. Roxanne told me I specialize in them, in which a charming sociopath marries a woman and usually kills her or something horrible happens,
Mm-hmm.
and somebody has to fight the good fight and bring him to justice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in oh shit, um, it, it oh this was it was called In a Child's Name,
Mm-hmm.
and in it um, the sociopath murders his wife, and then claims he murdered her because he in a moment of temporary insanity when he found her molesting their infant daughter.
Okay.
None of which was true.
Right.
Uh, um, and the ad department's ad was a giant blow. The Gerber baby,
Yep.
like Gerber baby food. It
Yep.
was a picture. It was an angelic picture of a baby's face like that, and the title of the movie in the child's name. It was beautiful to look at, and it told you nothing about
Right.
what the movie was about.
Right.
It could have been somebody who had legislation passed, to prevent. It could be anything,
Right.
and there was um, um, no hint at whatever the conflict would be.
Right.
Um, and they said, "Well, we don't have any other ideas." So I said, "All right, do this." over on one side, draw a doorway with a backlight coming through the doorway, and standing silhouetted in the backlight, the silhouette of a man. But we can't see any of his features. You just see it's the silhouette of a man, and then reflect that image in the pupils of the eyes of the baby, which
idea.
they did.
Yep.
And they made it as they did it as crappily as possible. So
Yeah.
so,
Yeah, because I didn't want to
so that
obey, right?
And I said yes anyway.
Yeah.
And before they actually printed it, they called me and made one last plea to take it out of the ad because I was, quote, ruining the ad. So we get to a staff meeting. The morning after the first half of it had aired and gotten the highest numbers for a miniseries in years. And the boss of bosses said, "This is an incredible ad. Who thought of this?" And the guy who called me and said, "You're ruining the ad," raised his hand and said, "We did."
Yeah.
And I did manage to control myself. After it was over, I went to my immediate boss's office, closed the door, and said, "I just need to vent about something." Not only did they not think of it, they did everything in their power to not do it.
Right. Well, yeah, but you had the exact concept. Well, I remember not as big of a deal, but we were doing the engineering forum, and people inside Microsoft don't understand. The engineers that we wanted to attend this forum didn't understand what a forum for engineers at Microsoft was. Like, that just wasn't the forum. What I have a job to do, right?
Right.
And there was widespread disagreement about why there even was a department called Engineering Excellence that would help to make us all more excellent at engineering, right? And some of the people in the department working for it thought that they were the definition of excellence. And so I adopted the symbol of a brain, and then I created a logo called Mindshift. And it was mind/shift. And then I wanted it surrounded by actual code, like as if it were flying by, right? Like snippets of code. I got a ton of pushback because what people wanted was just all of the information about the event, what the date was, how many sessions there would be, all that kind of stuff. And I said, nobody cares. Nobody cares about any of that if they don't understand why. And so I created the brain with the code flying and the word Mindshift because it was like, you're going to be talking about coding and your brain is going to change. Like, I know it's like simple, but it was literal.
It sounds for anybody who's in that world, it goes, well, this looks intriguing.
Yeah.
And
it wasn't just because most of them are information overload, right? They're bombarded with messages constantly, and that it just wasn't going to fly any other way. Let me just check something here. Oh, there you are. Good. What's on the camera? Oh, okay. Yeah, so we've landed, Commander. We mined some stuff. We took out some bad guys. And 1 o'clock, which is early for us. I had a very late night.
The audio's beginning to break up a little bit too.
Let's see here. How about now? Is it breaking up less? Test.
So
Test.
is that it for today, First Mate?
I think so.
I do too.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Take care. All right. Well, have fun. Thanks again for today. This has been awesome.
We will talk during the week and see you then.
Yeah.
Bye.
See you then. Take care. Bye-bye.